Heat check. Basketball, basketball, college. Basketball, basketball, college. Oh, is that time already? Whoa.
Welcome in to another Heat Check Hangout. I'm your host, Brian Rauf, joined as always by my co-hosts, Connor Hope and Riley Davis. Guys, today we're continuing our conference preview series, diving into the Big Ten, conference that has been perhaps the best conference in the country the past couple of years. You could argue between them or the Big 12, but this year projects to be more of a down year for the league. Excuse me. A lot of teams rebuilding, taking steps back after really promising groups are now through. It's going to create for an interesting conference title race, I think. It'll be interesting to see how that unfolds because there is wide open at the top. It looks to be pretty wide open at the top. When that's the case, I tend to look for really good players coming back to kind of lead their teams. And to me, Connor, that starts with Hunter Dickinson, Michigan. He's going to be a first-team All-American, one of the best players in the country. He's back for his junior season, and he almost left after his freshman. There is a lot of questions on his Michigan roster. Guys they thought would be back, like Caleb Houston and Moussa Diabate, are not back, but they've tried to piece a roster together around him that should keep them at least in contention with the top teams in the Big Ten.
Yeah, I mean, when you're talking about the best bigs in the country, you've got the big three, Tshiebwe, Drew Timme, and Armando Bacot. It's really difficult to not put Hunter Dickinson fourth, or even slide him as an offensive weapon into that top four, right? You know, Bacot and Tshiebwe are really good two-way players. Obviously, Timme is primarily an offensive weapon. That's what puts him in that conversation. Hunter Dickinson's not much different. You know, he might not be as good in the post as Drew Timme, but he can score from pretty much any level on the floor. You know, when it comes to this Michigan team, I know that it doesn't jump off the page, and there are questions with how their guards are going to play. You've got Jalen Llewellyn, who's coming up from the Ivy League into the Big Ten. How can he adjust? Jet Howard playing on the wing. You know, how can he make the adjustment as a freshman that they're going to really have to lean on? Joey Baker, you know, what can we expect from him this year? Kobe Buffkin's going to have a bigger role. So there's a lot of questions in the backcourt. But I think, you know, from the front court perspective, Terrence Williams, Hunter Dickinson, you know, might not be the best tandem in the front court in the conference, but they're in the conversation at least. And I like this Michigan team. I've been up and down on them, but you know, this week in particular, I'm on a pretty big upswing.
Yeah, Riley, I'm not going to ask you how they stack up against their top teams in the Big Ten because we'll get into that a little bit later. But what's the ceiling look like for this Michigan team to you?
Yeah, I think the ceiling would definitely be another trip to the Sweet 16. I think they've made however many in a row now, like 7 or something like that. I kind of feel the same way as Connor, whereas my feelings on them sort of fluctuate depending on the day. And recently I've sort of been buying into it a little bit because I'm pretty intrigued by these freshman wings. I think Jet Howard is someone who's probably a little bit underrated for the recruiting sites, just when you look at his skill set, the IMG pedigree, and even the fact that I do think it helps to have a dad who was a 18-year NBA veteran. You know, he's kind of seen like the necessary way to prepare, the right way to study the game. He knows what it takes to be successful. I know like all that other cliche stuff, but in this case, it's actually true. But he's pretty dynamic with the ball in his hands. I think he's a great athlete, high IQ, cerebral player who can make passes in transition as well. And I think Yusuf Kayat, I mean, he might take a little longer to adjust than Jet, but he still has some of that same sort of craftiness / shot creation upside from the wing. And by no means do I think that this Michigan team can reach the ceiling of like the 2021 team that lost to UCLA in the Elite Eight and when they couldn't buy a shot. But like looking back to that team when Hunter was at his best and when that team was at its best, it had wings like a Franz Wagner who could do a little bit with the ball in their hands, who could attack the basket off the bounce. And I think though neither Yusuf or Jet are really all that similar to Franz, they still sort of meet that need as guys with size and length who can pressure the rim and can do a little bit off the bounce.
guys who space the floor, too. Positional size that can help you defensively and handle some of those front court guys, but give Dickinson that room to operate down low. Right? They didn't have that as much last year. The four spot was a real weakness for them. This year that seems to potentially maybe not be a strength, but certainly not be as big of a weakness as it was last year. A lot of people will put Trace Jackson Davis in that same conversation with Hunter Dickinson as the best bigs in the country. He is certainly showing his talent to do that, Riley. I have not been as high on this Indiana team on this podcast. Our listeners certainly know that. But there also is no doubt that TJD is one of the more talented players in the country. If you look at him and Hunter Dickinson, those two look to be in let's say, the two favorites for preseason Big Ten Player of the Year. How do they stack up in your mind?
Yeah, that's a great question. I really would have to think about it. I'd probably lean Hunter towards Player of the Year between those two. Gosh, I sort of feel like I've pulled a reverse Indiana with how when they brought Xavier Johnson back and when TJD said he was coming back, and when you consider sorry, my dog's in here right now. Getting into something he shouldn't be. But when you consider, like, I think the pieces around Hunter are more conducive to his success. Like, I think TJD will put up numbers, and that team still might be better. But I think there's just going to be better spacing around Hunter to maybe, and he'll probably have a higher usage than TJD and put up a higher scoring output to where I can see that ends up being what swings it. Yeah, Indiana is really fascinating to me because I think we know how talented TJD is, but it seems like for kind of another year, the supporting cast, I mean, it's good, but there's plenty of talent there. I'm just concerned how the pieces fit.
Yeah, I mean, they, for a large portion of the college basketball world, considers them to be the preseason Big Ten favorite, Connor, and a lot of that is because what they have returning from a team that went on that run in the Big Ten tournament and won a first four game against Wyoming in the NCAA tournament. Can they win the league this year? Should they be in that position where they are the preseason favorite?
I think everything is so close that it's really hard to disagree when you say that. I think there's probably three teams that you could call the favorite to win the Big Ten, and I wouldn't knock you for it, which isn't a good thing for the Big Ten, but it is what it is. When it comes to Indiana, it's just, and we've talked about it before, you're expecting, they return everybody from a team that made a decent run in the Big Ten tournament, but that run was only 2 wins. Like, it wasn't like they ran through the Big Ten tournament and won it or anything. Like, they got the 2 wins they needed to get that first four game in the NCAA tournament. They beat a Wyoming team that I think was starting to kind of decline before the tournament. Like, Wyoming wasn't playing its best basketball in the tournament, and then they ran into a team that knew how to defend the pick and roll and couldn't do anything.
Well, that was something you talked about a lot last year. Is you'd watch Indiana play, and there's TJD, Xavier Johnson in the pick and roll. TJD is catching alley-oops because there's nobody in the lane. And it's like, where else do you think he's going to go? That's what he does best. And St. Mary's stopped it, and Indiana kind of wilted.
Yeah. Yeah, and you're just expecting, like, I think people are saying, oh, they return everybody from a team that did well at the end of last year, but they didn't do well at the end of the regular season. They didn't do well in Big Ten play at all. No. They wilted. They won 2 games in the Big Ten tournament. They won a game against a Wyoming team in a first 4 game in Dayton. But they barely lost to Iowa, but like, they got crushed by St. Mary's. And, you know, are we looking at that St. Mary's team from last year as a team that could, well, maybe, but as a team that should be the favorite? Like, if that St. Mary's team from last year was in the Big Ten this year, would they be the favorite? Probably not. No.
We cannot accept that the second place WCC team would be the Big Ten favorite. We can't allow that.
But you see all these people returning, but like, how much better can Xavier Johnson get? How much better can Miller Kopp get? How much better can Race Thompson get? When you're comparing Trace Jackson Davis to Hunter Dickinson, Trace Jackson Davis, I feel like for what he does is a better player, but he just doesn't do as much as Hunter Dickinson can do offensively, to the point where like I kind of want Hunter Dickinson on my team. So you're relying on Jalen Hood-Schifino, you're relying on Malik Renault, and maybe Tamar Bates to make a jump this season. And if those happen, yeah, they can improve, but are they going to improve from where they were last year to a top 15, top 20 team? Like they didn't make enough additions outside of that where, I'm jumping on a train similar to, a Creighton, where like we all believe Creighton's going to be really good. I just don't know if I see the same improvement on the roster or can expect the same improvement on the roster with Indiana.
You said Indiana was probably one of the 3 preseason Big Ten favorites. Who are your other 2 that you consider to be in that group?
I wouldn't fault you for Michigan, because I think the ceiling for Michigan is still there, and I still like the coaching staff. As long and my biggest concern with Michigan would be, does Juwan Howard try and make his son the star? But based on how much he played his other son last year, like I'm not gonna expect him to do that. They can make threes. Like I like the ceiling for this Michigan team, and then Illinois is the other one.
Mm-hmm. That's where I thought you were going with that. Riley, I think Illinois is in that threshold as well. I personally favor them over Indiana. I do have concerns about just how good Illinois can be, but you bring in transfers like TJ Shannon and Matthew Meyer, pair them with who they have coming back in some breakouts. There still are questions here, but I think there are fewer questions than you'll find elsewhere with teams projected to be at the top of the standings.
Yeah, I'm pretty in on this Illinois team, and I think like even just looking at their roster, they have so many high ceiling guys. I mean, you obviously have Sky, who was a 5-star kid, like top 15 talent before his injury, and just watching his games at Montverde last year, I know he missed a big chunk of the season, but there was a couple games against good competition where he ran that offense really capably, made a lot of smart decisions out of ball screens. And I think he seems pretty just like a willing passer who's going to make sure guys like Terrence Shannon and Matthew Meyer get their shots. And I mean, those are 2 dudes who love to shoot it. Like, you can believe that, especially Meyer in particular, when he's on the floor, he is looking to get his shots up. And I really think that there's still a little untapped upside for both Meyer and Shannon. Maybe get into a system under a guy like Underwood, who gives his guards a ton of freedom. Like you look at what Trent Frazier did last year, like the freedom he had to shoot off of ball screens, and they'd run those little like double screens for him to get him free for 3. Like, you're probably not going to be running a ton of that for Meyer. He can play out of ball screens as a ball handler a little bit, but Shannon, you'll probably get to see him take more threes. And even the guys they have coming back, like RJ Melendez, breakout candidate, Dane Danger, who was a top 100 kid once upon a time, who's allegedly got like great handles for a 6'9" dude. And the high school tape that I watched of Dane Danger, granted this was like 2 years ago when we were in lockdown and there were no live sports. I was just like deep diving random high school prospects like back in the spring of 2020. But some of the high school games I watched from Dane Danger, I was really intrigued by his skill set. So granted, they might have I have them number 1 in my preseason rankings, preseason Big Ten rankings, and they probably have a lower.
Breaking news: Riley has Illinois number 1 in the country.
Hey, that would be my me throwing a bone to Illinois fans after 2005. All these years later, congratulations! You get to be number 1 preseason over my heels.
Oh man!
But no, I think like they probably have a lower floor than your typical projected favorite in a power conference, but their ceiling to me is so high. If these switchable at all 5 positions, bucket getters, and just straight up dudes. Like I think Sky Clark is a dog. I think like he's got a frame that's already ready for the Big Ten at age 18. Like, I really love the upside of this Illinois team.
We've talked about 3 teams so far, and about freshmen playing key roles for all of them. Riley, you just talked about Sky Clark. We had Hood-Schifino with Indiana. We had Jet Howard with Michigan. a lot of the top teams in the Big Ten, Riley, are going to be relying on freshmen playing big roles in a way that we really haven't seen from Big Ten teams. Certainly these past couple of years, the Big Ten's been ascending. But I also don't think it's a matter of there just being minutes available that are given to anybody. Like these freshmen, those three, you can bring up guys like Jackson Kohler, Michigan State as well. These guys are quality freshmen. They're going to be stepping in and are going to have a major impact in the conference title race.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you look at, it's not just Sky for Illinois either. It's Ty Rodgers, who's sort of going to be that supercharged sixth man coming off the bench, can play pretty much any position on the perimeter and won't be a big time scorer, but does all the stuff that coaches love, makes hustle plays. I already talked about Jet and Yusuf and being intrigued to see how they're used, and even moving to like that second tier of teams. Like Ohio State is going to be relying a ton on freshmen, and they got 3 kids who are all 4-star recruits, top 60-ish guys, and there's 2 in particular with Bruce Thornton and Bryce Sensabaugh, who I think could carve out pretty significant roles for them. I think Bryce Sensabaugh is who I'm most intrigued of that group, just because he sort of looks like a wing version of EJ Liddell. Like the kid is 6'6", 240, plays a lot on the perimeter, and he's got a pretty good looking jump shot plus athleticism. But as I was like watching some of his Peach Jam games from last year, the first thing that went to my mind is that I'm like, oh, Holtman has a type. He saw this kid and was like, you are like more perimeter oriented EJ Liddell. Like, come be a Buckeye. So yeah, well, it's gonna. Good.
I was gonna say that's the question about this Ohio State team, Connor, is the fact that EJ Liddell is gone.
Yep.
Malachi Branham is gone, and now he should have left given where he went in the draft, but they were planning on him being a multi-year guy within the program. So we have a team now that is basically trying to scramble to fill that role. Zed Key is back. He landed Sean McNeil, West Virginia transfer. Justice Sewing's back as well. But there doesn't seem to be that same kind of upside with this Ohio State group. So how do you frame them in the Big Ten picture?
I think they have. I actually like the floor for this Ohio State team. I know that might be controversial, but I think given 4 of their presumed starters being McNeil, likely Sewing and Zed Key, we'll see what role Tanner Holden has, but if he can actually catch on at Ohio State and doesn't get buried in the rotation, I think that's a pretty solid, experienced rotation where Bruce Thornton, Bryce Sensabaugh don't have to be those guys. Like I think, and I will say it now, I think Sky Clark has more pressure on him to be good than almost any other freshman in the country. Because when you're looking at especially, let's just look at the Big Ten teams that we've talked about. Like if Bruce Thornton can't be the starting point guard, likely can be the starting point guard, and there's still a kind of solid floor for Ohio State. When you're looking at Indiana, like Hood Schifino can be ho-hum, but there's still enough talent there where Indiana can at least play at a high floor. Same with Michigan if Jet Howard doesn't hit. Even when you're looking at teams that are almost all freshmen, like Duke, right, you're still likely going to play a lot through Jeremy Roach. But this Illinois team, if Sky Clark doesn't hit, I don't know if I trust TJ Shannon to be a primary point guard. I like him more off ball. And when he has the ball in his hands, I'm not sure I trust that offense enough. Even though they are more versatile at all positions than they might have been last year. I think Sky Clark really needs to hit. But with this Ohio State team, their ceiling's not as high as it's been the last couple of years. But I still think their floor is pretty solidly NCAA tournament, especially if they can find some other shooters besides McNeil and Holden if he catches on.
I can't let us go this far into the podcast without bringing up Michigan State. And I was talking about the Spartans. They do bring a lot back from a group that was okay last year. Like I think Michigan State has been okay the last couple of years. Nothing necessarily special, but NCAA tournament caliber teams. This year, they're hoping to take the next step forward with the guys they had coming back. Mentioned Jackson Kohler on the inside. They're hoping he can play a big role as a freshman. Connor, do they factor in to the Big Ten mix at all, or is it just a matter of trying to make it back to another NCAA tournament?
I think their ceiling is probably that tier 2, that like next spot behind the top 3. I think their floor is also probably tier 2, right? You've got 4 really good shooters on that team around AJ Hoggard. You've got Tyson Walker, Malik Hall, Joey Hauser, Jaden Akins, all really good shooters from 3. If you buy into the AJ Hoggard breakout hype, if you buy into it, like, you could talk yourself into them being a top 25 team. I don't have them there. I don't think they belong there to start the season. I don't think they have the 5 man to do it unless Jackson Kohler is that dude. But like, I could see it. They have a great coach, and you're talking like they lose 4 key players, but they lose some ho-hum key players. So, I think what they lose is not too much to overcome. Really, it comes down to, can they find that solution at the 5? And if Jackson Kohler or Matty Sissoko is that guy that can play really solid minutes as a starting center, like, I think they could be in that 25 to 35 range in the country, but I don't think that their ceiling is even close. Like, I think their ceiling might be below the floor of an Illinois or an Indiana or a Michigan State or a Michigan.
Raleigh, do you see it the same way?
Yeah, I do. I would say their floor to me is like lower than tier 2, just because they have no depth, and any injury could make things look bleak pretty quick. And you're already seeing it with Jaden Akins having the foot injury, and he's someone who I know they're counting a lot on to sort of emerge this year. And I like Jaden Akins a lot. I think he's going to be the one who makes that step over Hoggard. I think Hoggard will be a solid distributor. I want to say he averaged like 7 points, 5 assists this past year, and could see that being maybe 10 points, 5 assists this year or something. But I think Akins is, to me, he's the best bet by far in the backcourt to be able to get you somewhere between like 13, 14 points a game. And Michigan State needs him to do that. They desperately need a scoring punch. And I don't know if you're going to get that from Tyson Walker. Maybe year 2 in the Big Ten, he's a little more comfortable, but he's a small dude in a league with a lot of big guards and a lot of size in general. I think you could say maybe he makes a similar leap to like what Bryce Aiken did his second year at Seton Hall, just with them being smaller guards who kind of got wherever they wanted to at the mid-major ranks and really flashed that type of footwork into shot making that tantalized a bunch of high major teams. But I also don't know if is that Tyson's mentality? Is he going to look to get his in the Big Ten?
He was key for them late in games. Like when they needed somebody to step up, more often than not, he was the one who was that. But he often kind of faded out of games, tried to find his way during the rest of the games. AJ Hoggard is interesting to me because there were so many times last year where he would go on these like 2-minute spurts, 3-minute spurts, where he looked like the best player on the court. And you're like, oh, there it is. Like, okay, there it is. Michigan State's got it. And then he'd vanish. And so it's finding some consistency from him. He doesn't have to play at those high highs all the time, but he can just maintain 80% of that and not vanish. Michigan State will be okay. And I think could crack the top 25. I'm not believing in that, though, particularly with a lot of the questions with the front court. I think Tier 2 is probably right. I think this is a tournament team. They're going to fall in that gap where you're definitely not a top 25 team, but also definitely not a bubble team, right? You're just kind of in that solid mix, which probably here puts you, in the top part of the middle of the Big Ten. Just kind of steady Eddie. That's going to be Michigan State to me this year. Purdue has similar questions, and Connor's wearing the Purdue hat. For those of you that are listening and not watching us on YouTube, Zach Edey's back, which is awesome. But Jaden Ivey's gone. Trevion Williams is gone. Eric Hunter and Isaiah Thompson are gone. Sasa Stefanovic is gone. How can Purdue – I'll go to Connor first for this. What are you expecting from Purdue, given all that they lost, even though they have perhaps the most dominant big man in the country, at least when he's on the court?
I think they're probably right behind Michigan State in that. Definitely not a top 25 team. And if I see one more top 25 with Purdue in it, I'm going to pull my hair out because they're not that. But
at Andy Katz, go ahead.
But a
say
tournament
his
team,
name.
and they're not
Andy
just,
Katz has the whole Big Ten ranked. It's fine.
they're a tournament team because Matt Painter is one of the best coaches, X's and O's wise in the Big Ten. I know you could question late game Matt Painter, but first 36 minutes Matt Painter is better than almost anybody in the Big Ten, and a lot of the games they can win in the first 36 minutes. Not this year, but generally when they win. Look, Zach Edey, incredible big. Can he stay on the court enough to make that difference? That's a big question. I like this front court, right? I like Zach Edey, Mason Gillis, Ethan Morton, who's kind of a guard forward wing, Caleb First. I like that front court. The back court is where I have questions because I feel like Brandon Newman could either be the starting point guard that takes them not to where they were last year, but takes them to a similar to Michigan State, a borderline kind of 25 to 35 team. But he could also be a bench piece. And you're looking at David Jenkins, Braden Smith, the freshman, both really small guards. Like Brandon Newman to me, I like because he is that bigger guard where Smith and Jenkins are 6 foot, 6'1". And if this is the last time I'll say it. If you have David Jenkins playing the point guard, he's going to take 15 shots a game. Nobody else is going to get good looks. And Purdue might miss the tournament. But I expect the backcourt to come along because I think Matt Painter, if anything else, he puts his guards in a position to win, but he doesn't have the guard that can do that this year. And that's what worries me.
That's my Matt Painter problem, is that he recruits big and refuses to play big. Like last year, he had two of the best big men in the country, and he wouldn't play both of them at the same time. And I understand there were defensive issues, but you should kill teams down low. And they just, nope, we're going to run one in, run one out. Edie's getting going. Okay, fine, we're going to swap him out. Travion Williams. And we'll see how it goes. Guards, you got this. And it bit him against one of the smallest teams they played all year in St. Peter's in the Sweet 16. But I digress. Anyway,
I think we're going to see something similar with Edie and First, though, which is also a big red flag.
Yeah.
And you forgot to mention Trey Kaufman-Wren, who's another, former top 50 kid who redshirted last year. He's going to – he's another 6'8" dude. I don't know if he can shoot. He might have been, a theoretical shooter coming out of high school, but that probably means he's, a 28% shooter.
Painter, I agree Painter is a good coach. But I'm starting to fall on the line of he could be better if he recruited to the style he actually coaches. I think the style he recruits and the style he coaches are two completely different styles. That I think is where a lot of the conflict with Purdue in terms of the discrepancy between how good we think they are and how good they actually are sometimes could come into play. I think they'll make the tournament, Riley. I am not 100% confident they'll make the tournament, though, because of those backcourt questions. And because we have to see Edie play 28, 30 minutes a game and actually make sure he can do that. Do you think Purdue's a tournament team?
Probably just because they always make it with Matt Painter. Even that year, I want to say it was maybe it was 2020 when the tournament got canceled and they were 16-16 or something. They were still a top 40 KenPom team. So they'll probably figure it out and maybe one of those freshman guards emerges. I think, they got pieces. Mason Gillis is a good glue guy who could at least give them another look in the front court. I don't know. That goes back to right into what you're saying about they got all these big guys and they're going to play a 6'6" forward next to Zach Edey. So yeah, I don't know. I'm sort of Purdue. I'm sure they'll probably get into the tournament, but I don't really plan on watching many games this year. I'll just depend on seeing whatever Zach Edey highlights circulate Twitter.
I think the biggest highlight for Purdue fans this season is going to be watching Jaden Ivey in the NBA.
Yeah, I agree with you.
That's going to be the most fun they have watching basketball.
That's probably going to play back into the Painter as a coach narrative that these same issues that you're hashing out. But
maybe Iowa's another team that's got to replace some NBA level top 5 pick talent. Keegan Murray is gone. People think Chris Murray is going to be the new Keegan Murray, his twin brother, which Chris showed flashes last year, but again, that remains to be seen. The rest of this roster has a lot of questions. Jordan Bohannon is gone after his 10 years in college. Joe Toussaint transferred out. He's at West Virginia. We know they're going to be really good offensively just because of what Fran McCaffrey does, but I don't know if they have the top-end guy they've had the last 3 years, certainly with Luka Garza and then Keegan Murray. That's going to make up for how bad they are defensively. And I have some questions about the supporting cast as well. I personally don't think this is a tournament team, Riley. Like, I think they take a step back this year. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
I kind of have Iowa towards that top tier. Not quite on like Illinois, Indiana, Michigan's level, but right beneath them. Just because, like, I mean, Fran's going on what, 3 years in a row now with a top 10 offense. I mean, I would need to check
the Luka Garza, Keegan Murray years. Yep. Yeah,
and I think like there's, it'd probably be unfair to project Chris to do exactly what Keegan did and average 24 points, but I think there's a pretty good chance he can get close. I mean, he's gonna get featured if Fran has showed us anything these last 3 years. He features his front court players, and you could even look back to what was that dude's name, like Peter Jock. Remember him back in like 2015, 2016, that time frame?
He was good.
He's gonna make sure his front court guys get featured. And I'm pretty intrigued by the supporting cast around him with Pat McCaffrey, with Tony Perkins. I think could break out in a bigger role, and even though like they're probably never going to be a great defensive team under Fran, but they figured something out these last year with like doing their whole press thing and using their length and actually causing a little bit of chaos to, using that situationally. They got back into some games because of that. So, yeah, I think Iowa's a little bit of a sleeper here to, again, maybe they'll crack the top 25 at some point. That wouldn't surprise me. It kind of seems like they always get off to a pretty hot start in the non-conference. I wouldn't, like, by the time the tournament rolls around, probably wouldn't expect them to be a top 25 team unless Chris is averaging like 25 a game. But I think they're a pretty safe bet to make the tournament.
Connor, do you fall more in Riley's camp or my extremely pessimistic camp?
See, I was going to say, before this even was a discussion, that Iowa's range of possibilities is massive, right? If it hits, if it works, if some of these projections are true, they could be a top 25 team. They could finish top 2, top 3 in the Big Ten. I don't think they win it because I don't think that you can expect all 3 of those top 3 teams that we discussed to play off their ceiling enough for Iowa to factor in as a title contender, given their defense. But they're very shallow. They don't play defense, and I don't expect them to play defense. I don't know what to think. I have them as a tournament team because I think they sneak in, but I do not view them as a team that will even sniff the top 25 because while I believe in Chris Murray, while I believe in Perkins, while I believe in McCaffrey to all be double-digit scorers, I don't think any of them are going to be the star that they need to carry the rest of this roster into a top 25 position.
Yeah, I'm with you. Wisconsin's probably going to take a similar step back as well. Lost a lottery pick, Johnny Davis. Lost a guy who had been in college forever in Brad Davison. Sorry, Brad Davison. Which, that April Fool's trick that Wisconsin played on everybody, where they had an official release that said Brad Davison was granted a 6-year eligibility, was very believable. And I think it had the entire internet for about 30 minutes before they said it was an April Fool's joke. But this is a team that lacked firepower last year, outside of Johnny Davis and Brad Davison, really. Those 2 guys are gone. Tyler Wall's back. You need him to be more consistent than he was last year. You need Chucky Hepburn to take that step forward and become that next guy, because if Hepburn doesn't do that, Connor, I don't know where this team's getting their offense from.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Hepburn, Like, your second option scorer is maybe Tyler Wall. Like, it's not good. I trust the team to play closer to its ceiling than I do Iowa. The ceiling is lower than Iowa's, but I trust the team to play closer to the ceiling. I'm not a Greg Gard fan by any means, but Wisconsin just seems to be that. They always play in the middle. They'll sneak in wins that you don't even pay attention, and then they're third or second or winning the Big Ten.
Right.
And in a game between Iowa and Wisconsin, give me Hepburn over Chris Murray. Like, I'm sorry, I think Hepburn would be the best player on the floor in that game. So I might change it. I think I might slide Wisconsin into the tournament as like the de facto. They make it because they're just there, and Iowa misses, because I do think they have similar depth problems. But I think the depth they do have, I trust a little bit more than the depth that Iowa has.
Yeah, I am not a huge Gard fan, Greg Gard fan. I also trust him more than I do a lot of coaches to have his team play at a certain level on a night in, night out basis, right? And I've had to come around to that, and the way they develop players too, similar to what they were doing under Bo Ryan when Greg Gard was on staff. There is, you'd go into a season like this and you'd wonder, where's the offense coming from, and then boom, here's these guys, Frank Kaminsky and Sam Decker. Where's the offense coming from? Boom, okay, here's Johnny Davis. Right? Like, just out of nowhere. Hepburn, to me, is the most likely to end up becoming that guy, but I don't know, again, if that's actually going to come to fruition for them. I probably have more confidence in them making the tournament than I do Iowa, but I also think the floor for both of these teams could get pretty low if those breakouts that need to happen don't happen. Because they're very reliant on them, more so than we've seen a lot of other teams that are counting on breakouts.
What is your opinion, Brian or Riley? Because they have this team also has a twin that's stepping into a role left by their twin who went to the NBA in Jordan Davis. Obviously, the expectations aren't quite as high as Chris Murray. But what can we expect from Jordan Davis this year? Because I feel like he's going to have a pretty significant role, even if he's not ready for it.
Honestly, I don't know. We didn't really see a lot of him last year, at least in positions where he had a chance to show what he can do, right? So I don't know. Be great for Wisconsin if he came through and had a kind of season that we think Chris Murray could have. But Chris Murray is in the position of actually playing some meaningful minutes and having the ball in his hands or touching the ball in some meaningful minutes that Davis didn't really get.
Yeah, I was hoping that Brian would have a better answer than me with a I don't.
We have no idea.
Also, big I don't know. I don't even really know how Wisconsin fans feel about him. You know, like, are they excited about him? Because it seems like I'm sure Iowa fans are all in on Chris, but yeah, I haven't really heard much about Jordan.
I mean, I think it goes back to just seeing him on the court, right? Mm-hmm. And he just hasn't had it. Not that he can't, but who knows? Greg Gard might, but nobody else does. We'll move on. Talk about Rutgers, because while we're in this conversation of teams that lost a lot from last season, Rutgers is replacing Ron Harper Jr., who, at least in recent memory, is the best Rutgers player in recent memory. Geo Baker is gone as well. They have some good guys coming back. Amayuri, Paul McCahey, Caleb McConnell. Solid core there. But part of what made them so good was that they had Ron Harper and Geo Baker leading them these last couple seasons. Now you're counting on those guys stepping up and other guys becoming role players behind them. Riley, is that something you think can happen? How much faith do you have in this Rutgers team?
I have faith in them to be bubbly. You know, they were on the bubble for most of last year until they got a couple key wins. I really like their top three. Like, I think Paul McCahey is one of the better, excuse the dogs barking, but I think Mulcahy is one of the better guards in the league, and I think Amourier is a certified stud in the middle. McConnell's obviously one of the top defenders in the league. But yeah, behind them, like you're relying a lot on Mawat. How do you pronounce his name? Mawat Mang. You're relying on him for a jump. Andre Hyatt as well, to where, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I feel like Steve Beichel is a pretty good coach and can get him in the tournament just because, like, they're going to play ugly and win ugly when they do, and they have a great home court advantage. But yeah, I mean, anything higher than like a 10 seed would be a surprise to me.
Connor?
Yeah, I'd put them at the top of that Wisconsin Iowa tier, probably. You know, they're going to win their home games, and they won't go undefeated at home, but they might lose one in Big Ten play, maybe two. I'd have to look at the schedule and see how many of those top 4 or 5 teams they play at home, but I'd put it probably two home losses. I don't know if they necessarily have the shooting to win games on the road in the Big Ten. But I like the 3 kind of core 3 they have returning. I like Cam Spencer to have a pretty sizable role in this rotation. Like, of all the transfers into this Big Ten behind Llewellyn and the Illinois transfers, obviously, like, I really like Cam Spencer to find a role with this Rutgers team and provide some of that shooting that they don't have anywhere else outside of Paul Mulcahy, and he's not even really an elite shooter. So yeah, I think they're a tournament team, but again, I think they're a middle of the Big Ten type of team.
I mean, looking at their like projected starting lineup, you have Mulcahy was a 34.7% shooter last year, McConnell 27.1%, Mawat Mag, not Mang, 23.5% shooter, and Cliff Maurier was 16.7. So if Spencer can shoot it and defend, like, I'm sure he's going to stay on the court, because that's a little bit bleak right there.
Yeah, Rutgers is going to be one of those teams to me who will do really well in conference play, partially because there are some challenged offenses in the Big Ten, and just the home court advantage of Jersey Mike's Arena, the artist formerly known as the Rack, will give them some wins. But I also think they're going to have enough stumbles in non-conference play that it could keep them out of the tournament. Like, I wouldn't be surprised at all if they finished above 500 in Big Ten play, let's say 11-9 in Big Ten play, but are 18-16 overall and miss the tournament. Like, that kind of season is kind of what I feel for Rutgers. I hope that they get in and play well. I just have some questions as to where the offense is coming from. Right?
Yeah, maybe
it's kind of been a common refrain.
Maybe bringing in Cam Spencer, you have a straight up Patriot League whisperer to keep you from losing to Lafayette to get into non-con.
Maybe
go out and get somebody from that league that got the best of you.
That was a rough November for Rutgers last year.
Who else did they lose to besides Lafayette?
I gotta look this up. But there were 3 games in there that it was rough.
Lafayette's got.
I know this is great. This is great podcasting. Us looking at Ken Palm here.
Info.
This is important info. It was a loss at DePaul, a loss at home to Lafayette, then a loss at UMass, back to back to back.
Jeez.
Yeah,
that is
not
so
great.
rough. That is awful.
Which then they followed up. They beat Clemson. The next game, they lost by 35 to Illinois. Just a rough first 8 games.
Yep.
For Rutgers last year.
Then beat like half the league on a stretch.
Yeah.
Ridiculous.
Well, it was a rough year for Maryland, too, last year. And every time your coach basically pieces out after the first month of the season, it's going to be a long year. But Maryland brought in Kevin Willard from Seton Hall, Connor. A bit of a rebuild here. There's some talent. But I also think that the better years of the Kevin Willard era are going to be ahead of Maryland.
Yeah, I wouldn't expect much from Maryland this year. They'll be competitive in the Big Ten. Probably finish towards the bottom. Don't make the tournament. Really, the key for Willard moving forward is recruiting the DMV and just getting those DC players Baltimore, DC, Virginia players to go to Maryland, because I think if he can do that, if he can recruit DMV, then 2, 3, 4 years down the line, Maryland's going to be a really tough team to beat. And that was the one thing that they couldn't do, was recruit the DC area, which was rough, because the DC area is talent rich. But they had a rough season last year. I don't know if this team is better, or it might mesh better than last year's team did, but I think talent-wise, it's probably a step down. So I'm not expecting much from the Terrapins.
Riley, I assume you're in the same boat.
Yeah, I think this team kind of stinks. Like, they'll be better than Nebraska and Northwestern, but, I mean, I get Jameer Young was a bucket getter at Charlotte. Shout out to the 49ers.
He's good. Jameer Young is good.
Yeah.
He'll be Maryland's best player.
Okay. I was curious what y'all thought about him translating up to the Big Ten. I've been a pretty big fan of go ahead. Yeah.
I was going to say, Maryland's best player might not be saying much in the grand scheme of the Big Ten, but he'll still be Maryland's best player.
I kind of like Dante Scott. He was someone who, I think he'd be a impact player on a good team. I don't know. Mm-hmm. He might be called upon to be Maryland's best player, and I don't know if that's if he's built like that. But I think good defender, can guard a couple different positions, decent on the glass. But yeah, looking at this team as a whole, I mean, Ian Martinez was someone who I thought could really blossom last year, and he was pretty much a non-factor. Like, I sort of bought into the hype on Maryland going into the year and got burned, so that's where I'm like, I'm going the opposite direction this year. But I do I do love what Connor was saying with what Kevin Willard's been doing on the recruiting trail. He's already got 2 really solid recruits coming in Deshaun Harris-Smith, who's a DMV kid, and Jamie Kaiser. Y'all know if Kaiser's also from the DMV? I think he might be from Virginia.
Not off the top of my head.
Gotcha.
He's close enough, I think.
Yeah, I've been impressed by what he's done on the recruiting trail so far, to where it's like caught my attention, where it's like, oh, maybe Willard was a good hire, but yeah, I don't think you're gonna see a whole lot this year. Probably looking at a team 2 or 3 years away when you start to see the dividends being paid off.
Yeah. 2 teams that hired new coaches last year going into the second season: Penn State, Micah Shrewsbury, and the Minnesota with Ben Johnson. Connor, I think both of those teams showed signs of promise last season, now are hoping to build off of that. Which one do you have more faith in? I'll just put it bluntly like that.
Penn State. I think I like Micah Shrewsbury a little bit more as a coach. I think I like the star power, if you can call it that. But I think Jalen Pickett is a first or second team all Big Ten type player for Penn State, and can put the team on his back at times. I do like Andrew Funk coming in. I think 3-point shooting, again, translates. That's one of the few things I think that translates up really well. For Minnesota, I'm not sold on Ben Johnson yet. I'm not sold on Dawson Garcia not making them a team that we find at the bottom, below the other 2 bottom feeders in the Big Ten. So give me Penn State.
Yeah, UNC suddenly got a lot better when Dawson Garcia left. May just be coincidence, but the timeline seemed to add up. Riley, of those 2, real quick, which one's your pick?
I'd probably lean Penn State as well. I might where I would say I disagree with Connor is Minnesota probably has the higher ceiling. I think that you do have the better star power with Jamison Battle and Dawson Garcia. Garcia didn't work. He didn't work out at Carolina. I don't think there's much love lost between Garcia and UNC fans. But I don't want to just ignore how good he was his freshman year at Marquette and what he did. And so I want to say it was the G League camp when he declared for the draft after his freshman year. I'm not going to pretend like I was deep diving G League camp film, but apparently he was crushing the competition there and looked like a pro. So, I think he wants to play pretty much exclusively on the perimeter. He's not really going to take guys into the post much. He was really bad at finishing around the rim during his stint at UNC. I don't think he didn't have a single dunk for Carolina, and seemed like anytime he would be in the low post, it was like just was never going to be able to finish through contact, really finish through strength. So if Ben Johnson wants to give him that freedom to, shoot a bunch of threes, to create a little bit off the bounce as much as like a dude his size can, like basically expose, use him as a mismatch on the perimeter, then you could see maybe closer to those freshman year numbers. But as a whole, I like Penn State better as a cohesive team. I buy what they did in year one under Micah Shrewsbury. I think between Seth Lundy, Miles Dredd, and Jalen Pickett, you have the pieces, the core of like what could be a really solid defensive team. It just comes down to that freshman center who Lucas likes. I can't pronounce his name. Y'all know what I'm talking about? Kebanier. I know Lucas has hyped him up a good bit, but
yeah, I will make it a clean sweep. I follow the Penn State camp as well of these two. I also think we can make it a consensus before we get into our projected standings that Nebraska and Northwestern are the bottom two in some order. So I'll frame it like this. We'll go real quick, Riley. Which one of those coaches is keeping their job, or are they both gone after this year?
I think they're both gone.
Connor?
Depends on how much Northwestern actually cares about basketball. But I think they're both gone.
I think Fred Hoiberg's back because Nebraska just paid Scott Frost $15 million to go away. And they're not going to want to pay Hoiberg another, I don't know what his buyout is, but I don't think it's small. I think they kind of locked themselves into that one, and Nebraska's okay, focusing on football and I think letting basketball do their thing for another year or two. But hot seat certainly there for both of them.
Have y'all ever been to Northwestern's campus? Sorry to... Have either of y'all ever been to Northwestern's campus?
I have. Yep.
I have not.
When Rauf and I hung out in Chicago this summer, we were with our buddy Kevin Sweeney, and he drove me around Northwestern's campus the next day. And just like looking at the campus, it's like right on the lake, really pretty campus, cool historic looking architecture. I'm sure they got a ton of money because just look at that alumni base. They should be crushing the NIL. Like, there's no reason why their basketball program shouldn't be better than it is. I know history is against it, but I left like my official visit to Northwestern thinking y'all should not be this bad at basketball.
I think it's probably very similar to the reason why Cal has all those rich alumni and they don't have a good basketball program, or even Stanford. Stanford's getting better maybe in terms of like attracting talent, but I think it's they don't care enough about basketball to actually give money to basketball.
Yeah, there's not enough of an emphasis.
There's Northwestern grads
to be great academic institutions care about their academics. Great academic institutions care about their academics. All right, so we have those two, the bottom of all of our projected standings. Connor, I'll start with you. Go quickly through your standings. Who do you have as the favorite?
Illinois. Yep. Illinois 1, Michigan 2, and I'll leave it at that for right now.
Okay, Riley, how do you see the top group?
Illinois 1, Indiana 2, Michigan 3. But Michigan, pump out a little more Yusuf Kayat propaganda. Let me see some more like hugs between him and Juwan Howard, and y'all will jump to that number 2 spot.
I am going Michigan 1, Illinois 2, and I'll leave it at that for right now. Since we're going our top 2. I think those 3 2 of those 3 will be in that top 2 in some order.
Yeah.
Given my thoughts in Indiana and how I don't think they're that good, I'll get more into that in a little bit. But I think 2 of those 3 teams we all mentioned, Illinois, Michigan, and Indiana, will be there in that top 2 in some capacity. After that is where things get a little bit tricky. I'm going to put Michigan State 3rd in mine, but I also think there is a multiple game gap between the top 2 and the second tier that I'm starting with Michigan State at 3. That's going to be pretty bundled up. So Connor, you cut it off after 2. So who's your 3, and we'll go down from there.
Ohio State is my 3. I like this Ohio State team. I trust them. I just trust them more than Indiana. I'm sorry. So I have Ohio State 4, Michigan State 5, or Ohio State 3, Michigan State 4, Indiana 5, Purdue 6.
That's pretty bold.
Yeah.
Indiana at 5.
I'll just go ahead. I know I'm cutting Riley. I have Indiana at 5 too.
Wow. All right. Well,
So I have Michigan. I have Michigan State 3. I also have Ohio State at 4, and I have Purdue at 6. But again, I think 3, 4, 5, 6. Which for me, 3 is Michigan State, 4 is Ohio State, 5 Indiana, 6 Purdue. I think there's like maybe a game and a half that separates them. I don't think there's much difference in that group.
Cool. With me, I have Iowa at number 4, and I kind of like their chances to hop into that top tier if Chris Murray lives up to the expectations. Michigan State at 5, which would be kind of the start of my tier 2. Purdue at 6, Ohio State at 7. And that's sort of the end of my tier 2, just those 3 teams right there. With Ohio State, they've been really bad defensively the last couple of years, and that was Holtman's identity when he first got there. And even at Butler, like he had Butler one year ranked as like a top 25 defensive team, and the fact that that's fallen off is a little bit concerning. And I'm really worried about the Buckeyes shooting. Like I said, Bryce Sensabaugh looks like a really good shooter at the high school level, but who knows how well or how quickly that'll translate. Like, I mean, how many years of Isaac Likely do we have to see to know that he's a non-shooter? And I like Isaac Likely. Like, theoretically, again, he's another one of those dudes like Dante Scott who I think could contribute on a good team. They're relying a lot on Sean McNeil, who granted is like a certifiable bucket.
He is awesome.
Like that team that with him and Deuce McBride 2 years ago, that team was so fun. Just like both of those dudes were absolute flamethrowers. So yeah, much needed for them. But yeah, I'm just kind of concerned about the spacing.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I don't know how much that, like, there's going to be so many offensively challenged teams in the Big Ten that having enough shooting or finding barely enough shooting will be more than enough in terms of overall production. For that reason, I'm also going to put Rutgers at 7. That's higher than I honestly feel comfortable with, but that's kind of how I say I have them 7. I have Penn State at 8, Iowa at 9, and Wisconsin at 10.
Wow, Iowa that low?
Yes,
I
must not
have
like these
Rutgers. Yeah.
no. I think Chris Murray will be okay. I do not think, and I also think it's unfair that we expect Chris Murray to drop 20 a game now. I think Chris Murray will be a good player, but they need him to be Keegan Murray for them to be any semblance of like NCAA tournament good. And I think that's unfair and too much to put on him because I don't think he'll produce that.
Where did I leave off? I left off at Purdue at 6. I have Rutgers at 7. I have Wisconsin at 8. I have Penn State at 9. And I have Iowa at 10.
Wow.
God, we've been doing this together for too long. We're starting to think the same.
All right,
Riley.
Yeah, I have
7 through 10.
I got Rutgers at 8, Wisconsin at 9, Penn State at 10.
Okay, so if we both have, or we all have Northwestern and Nebraska bottom 2, how do you guys slot then 11, 12? I would go, I think Minnesota 11, Maryland 12. Personally,
I'd flip them. I'd have
You'd flip 'em?
Maryland 11 and Minnesota 12. Yeah.
I have what Brian had.
I just trust the coaching at Maryland to keep them out of the bottom 3 more than Minnesota.
Yeah, I think that's probably fair. I honestly would feel comfortable lumping these bottom 4 together if you wanted to. I do think there'll be some separation with Maryland and Minnesota, and I feel more comfortable with Maryland breaking out of that group of 4. But I also think Minnesota is clearly the most talented. I think that'll win out on maybe 1 or 2 more games than it will for Maryland. All right, so before we get out of here, bold prediction. I might have a couple, and we've given some. Most of them have been Iowa related, or Wisconsin related, or Rutgers related. But Riley, your boldest prediction for the Big Ten this coming season?
I didn't think that Iowa as a top 4 finish was that bold until talking to y'all.
It might not be. We're just me and Connor started to think the same.
Yeah. Let's see. Boldest prediction. Let me go with Jackson Kohler averages 15 points, 9 boards, stays on the court despite what are perceived defensive limitations, wins Big Ten Freshman of the Year.
All right. Love it. Connor?
I have 2. I mean, I don't know. I'll give one, and then I'll give the other. I have Chucky Hepburn from Wisconsin in my first team. I think he's the best guard in the conference this year. I know I like Jalen Pickett, but I think Chucky Hepburn's the best guard in the conference. I do not think Chris Murray makes any of the all-conference teams this year. That's probably the bolder of the 2.
So I have started planning out. There's going to be a series of articles that's out on heatcheckcbb.com in the coming weeks where I go through 5 bold predictions, statements, just general thoughts about each major conference leading up to the season. I have that pulled up right now for the Big Ten. My number 3 is that Chucky Hepburn is a first-team All-Big Ten performer.
All right, so we can throw that out. Chucky Hepburn is going to be a bust in the Big Ten.
Sell me on Chucky Hepburn. Like, what can you say about...
Watch the last month of the season.
When he, banked in a bunch of threes and had, a...
He was great in the pick and roll, really good defender, became a much better shooter as the season went on, and he can create for himself. Didn't have to do it a lot because they had Johnny Davis do it. But he's the only guy now that's left on that roster who's a proven shot creator.
He also has that swaggerless Dennis Schroeder type hair dye job.
Yes.
I'm like, come on, Chucky.
Yes.
just go
I
full
also
blonde.
think there is...
Just copy what Sky Clark does with the hair. You don't need to be looking like Dennis Schroeder on the 2014 Hawks.
I also think there is such a talent drought in backcourts in the Big Ten this year that Chucky Hepburn might not be a top 20 guard in the country, and he's still probably the best guard in the Big Ten. Maybe Jalen Pickett is better, but I
was going to say very quickly, Chucky Hepburn or Xavier Johnson?
Chucky Hepburn.
Riley?
Unless Tristan's on the show, then Xavier Johnson.
I'll lean Xavier Johnson. Not by much, but I'll lean Xavier Johnson.
I think Chucky Hepburn...
For me, it's Chucky, and I don't think that hard about it.
All right,
I think Chucky Hepburn is better by himself. I think Xavier Johnson in, tangent or along with Trace Jackson Davis gets more done just because he has a Trace Jackson Davis to work off of. But I think Chucky Hepburn is a better guard than Xavier Johnson.
I'm going to give my second bold prediction and say Sky Clark is the best guard in this conference.
Okay. Riley loves the freshman.
Yeah, I do.
Riley loves the freshman.
I'm in on Sky. I think, and it's everything about Sky is so intriguing, and I can't wait to see what he does. So,
all right. So, Hepburn is one of mine. Another one, and I haven't been shy about sharing this on the podcast before. I think Indiana finishes closer to the bubble than they do finishing at the top of the Big Ten. To be clear, I do not think Indiana is a bubble team. But I also think they're going to be, at best, a fringe top 25 team that is not going to be in the Big Ten title race.
Yep.
So Indiana seems to be the odds-on favorite from the league. I have them 5th. I don't think they get that double bye in the Big Ten tournament. And I think they finish closer to an uncomfortable position on Selection Sunday than they do to, I don't know if they have banners for regular season Big Ten titles in Assembly Hall, but closer to that than having another one of those banners and trophies in the trophy case. Well, that'll do it for this Heat Check Hangout. Thank you guys very much for joining, whether you're listening or watching. If you aren't watching, make sure you check us out on YouTube, subscribe there. Tell a friend about us. Subscribe. We can get us anywhere you listen to podcasts. You know that because you're listening to us right now or watching us on YouTube. You can subscribe also on your phone. you want to get the podcast episode to you automatically every week. Make sure you do that. Tell a friend. Thank you again very much for joining us. My co-host Connor Hope and Riley Davis. I'm Brian Ralph. Thank you very much. We'll talk to you again next time.
Basketball, basketball, college. Basketball, basketball, college. Oh, is that time already? Whoa, basketball, college. Basketball, basketball, college. Basketball, basketball, college.